The mission of Jesus focused on two things. Personal transformation and social transformation. The transformation of the human heart and the transformation of society. For Jesus, both transformations are necessary. You cannot have one without the other, and that's important to know and to accept. For Jesus, there is no real social transformation without personal transformation. And personal transformation, if it is genuine, will inevitably lead to social transformation. And this is why for Jesus, contemplation and action go together. They cannot be separated. Contemplation and action, the most important word being and. In this video, I would like to focus on Jesus and personal transformation. Personal transformation. Why do we need personal transformation? Why do we need a new mind and a new heart, to use that language? A new mind and a new heart. Why? Well, because we're damaged. Because we're wounded. Because we are under the control of what we call the ego or the false self. Because we are not free to be the kind of people we're meant to be. Because we're not free to love in the way that we're meant to love. Because out of fear, we bury our gifts and our talents in the ground rather than using them. So, what was Jesus' program for personal transformation? Well, Jesus' program for personal transformation can be summed up in one sentence. In fact, it can be summed up in 4 words. Let yourself be loved. Let yourself be loved. Now, this sounds easy, doesn't it? But in practice, it's not. It's not. In fact, to let ourselves be loved as we are is probably the most difficult thing of all. It seems to me that if we are to let ourselves be loved as we are, we need to do 2 things. 2 things in particular. 1, we need to let go of our dislike of ourselves. And 2, we need to let go of our fear of God. Yes, our fear of God. The late Brennan Manning, author of The Ragamuffin Gospel, Abba's Child, and indeed many books on the Christian life, says that the advice Jesus gave to his followers can be summed up in this way. Let go of your dislike of yourself and your fear of my Father. Let go of your dislike of yourself and your fear of my Father. Now, I think that is a very powerful insight into the ministry of Jesus. What did the ministry of Jesus mainly consist of? What did it mainly consist of? Healing and preaching. Jesus healed and he preached. He healed and he preached. So let's take a look at both of those things, healing and preaching. Let's begin with healing. We know that Jesus' healing ministry was holistic, to use that word. It included physical healing, emotional healing, and spiritual healing. But Jesus did prioritize what we call inner healing. He prioritized the wounds in the heart, especially the wounds in the heart that cause shame and low self-esteem. Jesus sought to heal the wounds in the heart that make us feel inadequate and unworthy. That make us feel inadequate and unworthy. But how did he do this? How did he go about healing the wound of conditional love that creates low self-esteem? By offering people the gift of his companionship. Through an encounter and the relationship that grows out of an encounter. I believe the best word to describe the encounters Jesus had with people and the relationships that grew out of those encounters is companionship. And it was through that experience of companionship, which is of course a process, that people stopped disliking themselves. That they began instead to like themselves, to believe in themselves, to be compassionate with themselves, to love themselves, What is companionship? How can we describe it? Well, here is how psychotherapist and author Brian Thorne describes the experience of companionship. He says, to be in the presence of someone who does not pass judgment, but who extends deep understanding and total acceptance is to be able to relax into being. In such company, it is possible to let go of anxiety and to be freed from the need to perform or to achieve. A companion is someone who accepts you as you are. A companion is someone who is interested in you, genuinely interested in you. A companion is someone who listens to you with attention. A companion is someone who understands you, who gets you, to use that expression, who gets you. A companion is someone who breaks bread with you, who enjoys the experience of having a meal with you. This was the kind of companionship Jesus offered people, and it changed them. It helped to heal the wounds in their hearts, especially the wound of low self-esteem and shame. Let's now turn to Jesus as preacher. We know that Jesus as a preacher told a lot of stories. He was the great storyteller. Now, many of these stories that Jesus told were about God. Now, Jesus' stories about God focused on who God really is and how God is present in our lives. They didn't focus on what God expects of us. You see, Jesus was more interested in telling us what we can expect from God than in telling us what God expects from us. Jesus sought to change people's image of God, to change the way they saw God. Richard Rohr puts this well. He says, Jesus came to change our minds about God, not God's mind about us. God's mind about us didn't need changing. Jesus sought to move people away from a demanding God, a judgmental God, an exclusive God, a God of the few and the perfect, to an abundant God, a generous God, an affirming God, an inclusive God, a God for everyone, especially the imperfect, and that's all of us. The name Jesus gave to his God was Abba, Abba. Now, we can have no idea how revolutionary the name Abba was. It literally means Papa, Papa. And for the Jewish people, it evoked words like affection, tenderness, warmth, intimacy. The Abba of Jesus is not a God to be frightened of. The Abba of Jesus is not a God to be frightened of. The Abba of Jesus is a God who accepts us unconditionally, who sees us as his beloved daughters and sons, who loves us to bits. So, how do we get to know the Abba of Jesus? How do we access the unconditional love that the Abba of Jesus offers us? Through silent prayer, through ways of praying known as contemplative practice. Jesus said, when you pray, do not babble. Do not babble. Do not think that by using many words you will be heard. No. When you pray, go into your private room, shut the door, and be with your Father who is in that secret place. And in that secret place, your Father, your Abba, will tell you that he loves you. There is a little room. There is a space within each of us that we are invited to go to retreat into. There, in that little room, in that inner space, Abba is waiting for us. Abba is waiting for us. There, in that little space, that inner room, Abba speaks to us words of affirmation and approval. Jesus himself regularly went into his inner room, and there he heard Abba say to him, "You are my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased, in whom I take delight." There, Jesus was grounded, anchored in Abba's unconditional love. And from there, from that experience in his inner room, he changed the world. He transformed society. He made the world a better place. The example and the preaching of Jesus suggest that the process of personal transformation can't really happen unless we're prepared to expose ourselves to the unconditional love of God in contemplative practice. It is through, or mainly through, fidelity to contemplative practice that we are gradually changed into free, loving human beings. So let me conclude by saying this. Because of our wounds, we all have a big hole inside us. A big hole inside us. And unfortunately, we try to fill this hole with the wrong things, with possessions, with work, with success, with fame, with approval, with power. These things don't work. Only the right kind of love can fill the hole we have inside us. Only the right kind of love can fill that hole. This love, this right kind of love, has two channels. It is two channels. One human, the other spiritual. The human channel is the experience of companionship. The spiritual channel is contemplative practice. This is why companionship and contemplative practice were Jesus' way of personal transformation.